Well, hello, everybody out there in the Boss Hole Transformation Nation. Welcome back to the Boss Hole Chronicles. This is John Broer from Real Good Ventures, welcoming you to this episode. And remember, at the Boss Hole Chronicles, we never want to waste a good opportunity to learn from a bad boss. But today we're going to be taking a little bit of a different perspective as to why people are reluctant to move into leadership roles. Why are people reluctant to lead? And this actually comes from an article that I reread from December of 2020. It was actually published in the Harvard Business Review, and I will put that in the show notes for you to be able to read. But what I found fascinating about this are the reasons that people are reluctant to accept or step into leadership roles. And I'm going to be joined by Sara, my wonderful partner and friend, and we're going to dissect this a little bit more and get a better understanding of why people don't want to move into leadership, and also what are some things that organizations can do to encourage or build a little bit more of that leadership muscle if people really have an interest and a predisposition for it. So let's dig in. The Boss Hole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode.
Hey there, John. How's my partner? Good to be together again.
It is. 2 weeks in a row. This is amazing. And it's good to be back together. And I hope you're having a wonderful summer.
Absolutely. It's a busy summer. I know yours is too. Lots of good things happening.
For sure.
Our clients are running crazy too, in good ways and maybe some not so good ways.
Mm-hmm.
But we have good stuff to talk about today. John, what would you say our subject matter is for today?
Well, I am captivated, Sara, by the proliferation, and it's not recent. It's been going on for a long time, but, LinkedIn is, we're very active on LinkedIn, and we obviously publish all of our episodes via LinkedIn. And I have just been really interested over the last few years on how much leadership content is being offered up and pushed to the public, and let's just say to people in the work world, meaning, hey, this is how you become the leader within, and this is the way you curate or cultivate your leadership capabilities. And the thing that's always fascinated me about that is not everybody necessarily wants to be a leader or foisted into a leadership role. Mm-hmm. So what about being a good follower or a good team member or a good collaborator? Not everybody, if everybody was in a leadership role, who's going to be behind us to really work on whatever needs to be worked on? So anyway, it ended up in my feed recently. It was an article back in 2020 from Harvard Business Review, and we will actually post this in the show notes. And the article is entitled, "Why Capable People Are Reluctant to Lead." And I thought this was fascinating because of my, observations on what I see with leadership content and leadership workshops. And this came to us from, I'm going to try to pronounce their names, Chen Zhang, Jennifer Nargang, Susan Ashford, and D. Scott DeRue. And out of consideration for all four of these authors, I apologize if I mispronounced any names. However, they did a study with 400 MBA students, and I thought it was really interesting in terms of identifying why don't people want to lead, or what is the reluctance to lead. Now, granted, these are, it said, and as it states, 400 MBA students working in consulting project teams. So these are people that are still early in their careers, and yet at the same time, yeah, but that's true. That's right. Yeah, potentially early in their careers. But what was their reluctance to lead or be asked to step into a leadership role?
I feel like, John, we should have a drum roll as you work toward revealing this, because it's pretty simple and straightforward. It's one of those 4-letter words that we might not think of often.
That's exactly right. And what is that 4-letter word, Sara?
Risk.
Risk. Absolutely. Three kinds of risk that they talk about. Now, we're going to reference the article. You can go read it, but we're going to, as we typically do, really look at it through the lens of what we're experiencing in our world with our clients. Now, the first one that they list is interpersonal risk. And it simply states that when asked why they were hesitant to step up to lead, one respondent said, sometimes you don't want to risk that friendship and hurt another person's feelings. So, and one of the things we've always talked about in leadership academies and when we're working with leaders is that leadership, management, they are not popular. It's not a popularity contest. Leadership and management is not a popularity contest. It's about being effective. Now, you don't want to create enemies. You don't want to unnecessarily sour or damage relationships. But when put in a leadership role, according to their study, there were interpersonal risks associated with that.
I can't help but think about two things, John.
Okay.
Some people have a much more collaborative leadership style. And I'll like a simple reference. I might have even shared this in other podcasts. You know, I have 3 children. 2 of them have pretty high, what we'll call high patience. They have a need for steadiness. They're very responsive. They have low dominance. So their idea does not have to win. My poor children, because they live with me. My ideas always have to win. But for them, this collaborative approach to anything would make it very difficult to call somebody out or highlight an issue or draw attention to something that would make somebody feel uncomfortable.
Right.
They just don't want to do that. So I think there's a depth to this risk. Even in a relationship, we could say, come on, you know, it's not about being friends at work. No, it's more than that. I don't want to hurt somebody. I don't want people to not like me. And I think that's the other aspect of this. People feel comfort in healthy or positive relationships. So why would I do anything to mess that up?
Yeah.
Because it creates stability in my life. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Absolutely. And again, we would say just in our work with behavioral data and reference profiles that anyone can lead. They're just going to lead. We want them to learn how to lead from their reference profile. So in other words, for somebody who is more steady or more collaborative, you can be a steady and collaborative leader. You don't have to adopt this, you know, high-powered, aggressive leadership persona that maybe, you know, our traditional models would support. But you can lead from your reference profile. Just need to know how to do that and do it effectively and mitigate the potential for interpersonal risk. I think that's a great example.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of a CEO I've worked with in the last year who is collaborative by reference profile and by nature. And oftentimes his biggest resentment or frustration is that people would put him in a position where he had to maybe mediate a challenge between 2 high-level leaders or make a decision because 2 other people or 3 other people couldn't. And I think once we landed on the fact that that was the challenge for this CEO, I don't want to have to make those calls. I don't want to have to deal with this drama, if you will, this maybe BS sort of between people. Yeah. Because a collaborative leader looks for people to say, whatever you think is best, or let's just work together. And so he had to learn how to flex muscles and adjust and adapt in certain situations, not all the time. Didn't have to change who he was, but in certain situations, he had to dial up that dominance enough to say, I've listened to both of you share your ideas. It's time to call it. And this is my call. Here's what I'm going to say about this. And over time, growing in comfortability with being able to do that. Recognizing that even if it gets uncomfortable or tense in some of these conversations, it doesn't mean that the relationship is bad or that he is failing.
Yeah, that's right. That makes me think of a recent conversation I had it this week with another CEO who talks about, you know, they want to work on leadership development within their teams. And they're talking about, well, let's give them like, you know, 10 or 12 different leadership philosophies or leadership models, and which one do you ascribe? And I told him, I said, we're going to turn that around. I said, we don't look at it that way. Look at it that way. That's like allowing the external world to determine how you lead. Again, leadership is your leadership DNA is hardwired into who you are. And I think to your point, over time it evolves. You get to know who you get to that self-awareness allows you to cultivate a leadership approach that is natural, allows you to adapt, allows you to broaden your leadership capabilities, but it's very, very much an inside out sort of thing rather than the external. And that's what frustrates me about all this LinkedIn stuff. Nothing wrong with LinkedIn and the leadership stuff, but it's almost like, here's the definitive way to lead. I disagree with that completely. Or I would say we disagree with that completely. We take a different perspective. So the next one, and a different perspective, the next one they talk about is the image risk. And this is not wanting to be seen as a know-it-all. So assuming or taking a leadership role, again, that doesn't presume that you know everything, because nobody does. And that also suggests to me that maybe this person, the respondents to this, have a bit of a skewed view of what leadership is supposed to be. And I don't know that I've ever read that leadership is supposed to be, you put people in leadership roles that know everything about everything. And that is just patently untrue. It can't be true.
Right.
But that is one of the things that they found.
Well, and it makes sense to me, kind of related to what we just talked about, John. There are some people who would struggle with, being projected out in front of others, or feeling like somehow that they're being cast as better than other people. Then I'm thinking, then there's people like our profiles, John, and we don't have any problem with that, because we have to fight the opposite of that, which is my way is better than your way. So I think that in this particular case, it just strikes me that maybe not as many people are cut out for or aspire to that kind of high level leadership role that requires decisive action, that requires taking risk, because of these reasons we're talking about. So yeah, it's image risk. I don't want to look bad in front of other people. I don't want people not to value me, or I don't want people to think less of me.
Well, for sure. And we're going to talk about risk, because there's a very specific way we look at risk, which is something we can measure. But the other thing that the article talks about is the risk of being blamed. So it's not just being viewed as a know-it-all, but if something goes wrong and something goes south, that I become the one that gets blamed. And to me, Sara, before we talk about sort of the nature of risk, because risk is something that is how a person deals with risk is hardwired into your behavioral DNA. We can measure that. So, and we'll get to that in a second. But when I think about all three of these things, interpersonal risk, image risk, risk of being blamed, this absolutely harkens back to what we would consider to be a lack of psychological safety, or an absence of psychological safety in an organization. And you can go back to we'll put them in the show notes, a number of our previous episodes, specifically the one with Dr. Amy Edmondson that talks about psychological safety. And just to remind everybody, the definition of psychological safety is the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. In other words, there is low interpersonal fear and a high degree of comfort to challenge the status quo. Well, that's kind of what leaders are supposed to do, to a degree. All right. Maybe challenge the status quo, identify things that are wrong. And when you have psychological safety, that is easier to accomplish. But these risks that I think are called out would suggest to me that, hey, wherever this is happening, if this is present, you have a very low amount of psychological safety, maybe within the team or within the organization itself. So again, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, I would offer too that if we have leaders who are perfectionistic and have excessively high expectations of themselves and other people, we encounter people like that all the time, John. Even if they're not a leader, but they really, drive by this idea that I have to get this right. I have to get this right. To expand the responsibility zone to other people creates a huge challenge. Even managers at this level tend to kind of take work away from people because they can do it better than they can, or they just think it's quicker and more efficient, et cetera, et cetera. So I have to think about, another complexity in this risk of being blamed is this idea that, God, I have enough of a challenge controlling what I'm supposed to do. And I don't want to take on the responsibility of what other people do, because quite honestly, they don't even work as hard as I do. So I think there's that element to it, although that doesn't necessarily impact psychological safety. It can create lack of safety for other people. So how many times have we encountered a manager or a leader who they're kind of inflexible, immovable? There's only one way to do it. There's a right way, but it's not because they're high in dominance. It's because they're high in what we call formality, the D factor on the predictive index. They're high in that need for precision, accuracy. It's a strong drive to go by the book, to follow the rules, to execute on the plan, to do it efficiently, effectively. I think about this risk of being blamed. That would expedite or create more challenge for a person like that. And we see more of those kind of people in leadership roles than probably I would like, because what happens is they just don't necessarily want to give up their standards, and it's kind of putting them in a very difficult position to ask them to develop or give other people a chance to make a mistake. There's no room for mistakes, is what I'm saying.
Yep. And statistically speaking, because of the research you and I did back in 2019 about change readiness, and again, change readiness, only 21.5% of the human population are what we would call change champions. You and I are in that category, comfortable with risk, proactive. Let's go do something. If we do it wrong, don't worry, we'll change it again. Well, 64% of the population are more what we would call change challengers. And it's not resistors, but there's an aversion. So when you thrust somebody into a leadership role, you have to account for how ready are they for change. That's a change in and of itself. And a good thing about the article, and again, it gives some solutions, it gives some ideas, but the first one talks about understanding how individuals deal with risk. And we can measure that. I mean, that's something we can measure with our behavioral assessment. And we will be right back.
With employee disengagement at its highest level in 9 years, your company can't afford to miss the mark when it comes to optimizing your hiring, management, and team performance practices. At its lowest level, employee turnover costs you $11,000 per person. And those are dollars you can easily save with the right set of people analytics. Real Good Ventures is a talent optimization consultancy specializing in world-class analytics specific to your people and the critical role they play within your organization. Gain confidence in your hiring practices, keep the boss holes from driving your talent away, design your teams for flawless execution, and create a culture that offers meaning and fulfillment. Real Good Ventures has a family of validated diagnostic tools specific to the human aspect of business, because we know that all business issues are people issues. Visit us today at www.realgoodventures.com and bring meaning and fulfillment back into your workplace.
Okay, let's get back to the program.
So we're talking about risk. How about, John, are there ways then, if these are common responses for why people are reluctant to step into leadership roles, to put themselves out there, what are some things that help mitigate the risk?
Well, I think and as it would suggest that, and we're talking about it right here, understand a person's capacity for risk. So our behavioral data, I'm a captain, you're a persuader. There are other assessments out there. We think the ones we use we know they're highly validated and highly accurate, but you and I are comfortable with risk. The majority of people tend to be averse to risk or have an aversion to risk. And so if we know that about them specifically, we know what we're getting into if in fact we're going to encourage them to take on a leadership role. I mean, so managing that and knowing it ahead of time, in other words, self-awareness and awareness of the other individual, don't guess, just absolutely know this, because as we say, if moving into management or a supervisory role or a leadership role is the only way for advancement in the organization, and there is no pathway for the individual contributor, who's going to say no to an opportunity? People, because I don't want to be viewed as weak or inconsistent or afraid of something. I'll suck it up and I'll take on the risk. But, there is this reluctance, and whether they do or not, you can pinpoint that. You can know that about the person, and then that becomes part of how you guide them into a higher risk scenario.
I think that makes me think of the fundamental attribution error, John.
Oh,
we
yeah.
talked about that before. It's that psychological notion that we overemphasize personal characteristics when performance is challenged or something bad happens, and we underemphasize other circumstances and characteristics, et cetera. But in those cases where a manager has, an individual contributor has become a manager because that's simply the only path there is to have title and revenue and increase shares in the company, et cetera, then we make it about their character. They're not stepping up to the plate. Those kind of stories persist when in fact it's really more scientific. Like they're not designed to do that work unless and until there's some support. So I know that's what you're going to talk about here. How do we support people who actually have stepped into leadership roles? How do we help them mitigate the risk?
Well, and another option that is offered up, or another solution that is offered up, is, give them some tools to manage conflict, give them some tools and direction to deal with some of the interpersonal issues that come with being in a leadership role. But we have a lot of tools that we are able to generate out of our platform, like a relationship guide, management strategy guide, things that help the individuals both understand how to work through conflict. And I mean, Sara, in the work that you do specifically around creating a cohesive team, understanding what are our...
Well,
go ahead.
Can I just offer that, authors like Dr. Jeremy Pollack, he's been a guest on our podcast in the past. He has a book called Practical Guidelines for Dealing with Conflict. And the challenge is lots of communication feels like conflict. It depends on what you experienced as a kid. It depends on your reference profile. So if we could demystify the term conflict and sort of embrace it as tension or, discord, that doesn't really have to mean anything about you or the other person. Practical tools like what Dr. Pollack provides, you have Crucial Conversations and other really sound programs, if implemented effectively or if practiced, can become a way to neutralize the risk. It just becomes actually a way to be in integrity when you're working with another person, to be honest, to be your authentic self, to say what you really mean. Radical candor. Our other guest, Kim Scott, talks about, she has a really great, Matt Pepsel on LinkedIn highlighted her newsletter. I saw that the other day. She has a LinkedIn newsletter that I would stop everything and read every week. To be fair, John, I know you commented about LinkedIn. The other thing is, for those risk sensitive colleagues, you talked about this one, but there are some people that, it's not fair to put them in the position to make the call. They are collaborative decision makers. As you indicated, data can help us understand who is more like that. But if we share the burden of decision making, if we let a leader get information from others so that they can have the weigh in and reduce the risk of upsetting the apple cart or pissing somebody off or making the wrong decision, that's simple and easy to do. It's stopping letting people flying out there by themselves. It's supporting them and coming alongside them.
Yep, for sure.
Okay. What else, John?
Well, and I think just quite simply, we've talked about this before when we talk about moving somebody from the individual contributor pathway into a leadership or management or supervisory role, ease them into it. Give them an easy entry into whether it's a project or a couple of individuals to help lead that project, the people. Don't thrust them into a situation or a more intense leadership role and increase the risk that they're going to just implode or burn out or not know what to do. And so when we think about that easing, I think about, what we've learned from Dr. Amy Edmondson about destigmatizing failure. In other words, let's allow people the latitude to fail intelligently, and including in new leadership roles, and acknowledge that, hey, you're going to stumble, you're going to make some mistakes. That's perfectly okay, because that's what happens when you're taking on something new. But ease them into it in a very simple way and see how they do, and then help them grow as a leader. And we just had last week, we just published an episode that talks specifically about engagement And one of the things we need to do is training our managers. So if you're going to move somebody into management, don't do it without providing them the training and the tools to do that and equipping them to be an effective leader, but on a small scale versus a large scale.
Yeah. I have a really good example of that, John.
Yeah.
And before I share that example, another thing we need to keep in mind is vulnerability. So if I'm a leader and I'm expecting my manager, to take risk and fail and try things and fail, I better be willing to demonstrate my own vulnerability and willingness to do that too.
For sure.
So it's something we have to both say and do and model. And then we know of a CEO who actually rotates manager level individuals in their organization onto the leadership team to give them exposure. So it's a 3-month commitment. They attend as sort of an at-large member of the executive leadership team. They become familiar with the room and how the meetings happen and the kind of conversations that take place, which also says a lot about this executive leadership team, that the transparency is there. And so those individuals rotate through and they have a plan in place to expose people in digestible amounts to what it takes to operate at, for example, a senior leadership level. Not difficult to do, but kind of not conventional either. People are like, you're doing what? You're bringing who in here?
Yeah.
But it's continued on. It's like second or third year. And this is an organization that will lose 5 of its top leaders to retirement in the next 3 to 5 years.
Right.
So it's a smart move to get people in the mix and to understand how they work.
You're right. This is not conventional. And we have multiple clients that do this. Had a conversation yesterday with a CEO, and what they have done, and it's not because of retirement, but when we took them through the team discovery process and they looked at what type of team they had for their executive team, there was a deficit. I mean, there was a part of their layout, if you will, within the team discovery circumplex. There was nobody in one of the quadrants. And what they decided, and we worked together, I was guiding them in this process, is to say, well, who is at the next level who actually could fill that quadrant, that void, and provide voice to those perspectives? And they're doing the same thing. They're getting ready to rotate off 3 people, bring up another 3 to provide balance to the executive team. So you're right. It's unconventional, but it absolutely is something that organizations should consider. It's a powerful, powerful tool.
Smart business move.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Sara, thanks. I really appreciate the chance to bring forward this idea referenced by the article. Go ahead into the show notes, everybody. You will see a link to the article, but here's something else that's in the show notes. Please go in there and you will see a survey that we've created just to get your feedback in terms of any reluctance you may feel around stepping into a leadership role. And it will give you the same options, whether it has to do with risking interpersonal relationships, being a know-it-all, or taking the blame for decisions. And there'd be an option for you to enter in another idea. But we'd love to find out if you have any reluctance to risk or any reluctance to moving into a leadership role. What would that be? So go into the show notes and check all that out. But thanks, Sara. This was great.
Thank you. And we'll see you next time on the Boss Hole Chronicles.
We'd like to thank our guest today on the Boss Hole Chronicles. And if you have a Boss Hole Chronicles story of your own, please email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Once again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you again soon.